Well, let's take you back to something we talked about in the news. This is, of course, those planned May Day protests here in France. Massive rallies planned against Emmanuel Macron's pension reform. Solange has been looking through the newspapers for us, Solange.
Yeah, as Le Monde tells us, it hasn't been since 2009 that all of the major French unions have joined together, have decided to walk together for this 1st of May, Labor Day, May Day parade march. And this is, as the Sunday Times tells us, with a bit of a pun as well, a May Day for Macron, for Emmanuel Macron, as a turnout will give an inkling, or could give an inkling, about whether or not these anti-government protests against Macron's pension reforms will continue or not. Or as the Swiss paper Le Temps puts it, this 1st of May is already historic, with France wondering if this 13th day of strikes that falls on French Labor Day will be, quote, a bouquet final of the movement, or whether it will kick off more continued anger and more strikes.
Back to our top story now, that violence in Sudan, despite the extension of a truce. Now, the UN is sending an envoy there in what it calls an unprecedented situation.
Yeah, as the Financial Times tells us, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations has said that this conflict in Sudan could be worse than Ukraine for civilians, for civilian deaths. Already thousands have fled, as The Independent shows us on its front page today, with evacuations continuing of British nationals from an airfield outside Khartoum. Now, as the BBC notes, it says that Sudan's former prime minister, he fears that this conflict could become, quote, a nightmare for the world, as it runs the potential with two well-trained armies battling one another, of creating hundreds of thousands of deaths and even more refugees. Now, to better understand this conflict, I highly recommend this article from The Observer, the Guardian's Sunday Observer. It calls this a war of our age. It explains that the battle is being fueled by, quote, a shifting cast of opportunists. And it draws parallels with the war in Syria and explains how this war is different than the more classical warfare in Ukraine. It says that in Sudan, it is a warfare of an interconnected world, or a multifaceted conflict that could be long and deadly with widespread repercussions.
Time for some cartoons in the press review. Solange has pulled a few out for us. The theme, well, it's King Charles III's coronation on Saturday.
Yeah, I've chosen a couple of cartoons that sort of poke fun at the planned events for the coronation. As we see in this first one from the Times, it's in regards to inviting the public to, for the first time, to partake collectively in pledging allegiance to the king. Here you have a page saying, okay, whose idea was it to invite the public to say an oath to the king? Meanwhile, he's trying to shut the doors, with many expletives coming from outside over the outrage of this idea. And then you have another coronation event, the Big Help Out movement, or calls for Brits to participate and help their communities to volunteer on next Monday's national holiday. Well, for The Guardian's Nicola Jennings, it is Big Help Oneself Day, referring to Charles's massive, vast income and wealth, as well as the fact that he is not paying for the coronation and he's not paying inheritance tax either.
Now, some environmental news. Not good, this first one. It's about ocean currents.
Yes, indeed. I found this article absolutely fascinating. It's from Mother Jones. It's terrifying and very informative. Mother Jones has published a report that was first in the Yale Environmental Journal, and explains that climate change's heating of seawaters could soon collapse ocean currents. But scientists found that it's not where they think, or where they initially thought the currents would collapse, i.e. they initially thought it would be in the Atlantic, but instead they found that the ocean currents could collapse in the Southern Sea or around Antarctica, and that could be very dangerous because the cold water movement there provides nutrients to oceans across the globe.
And finally, something a little bit more positive on the environmental front. What's this about?
Now, I couldn't leave you with that doom and gloom. This is about rewilding and how it's coming and growing in Europe. or Europe has taken another step, or should I say a roll forward in regard to rewilding. The Guardian tells us that dung beetles have been reintroduced into a reserve outside Bordeaux, where wild cattle roam. And these pushers of dungs, who you see here, well, they could help restore the soil and add more insects to the ecosystem, for the reserve to be, quote, a place where nature is let go to fix the man's mistakes.
I love your phrasing, Solange. Pushers of dung.
Yes, that's what they are.
Very nice. Yeah, thanks very much. Solange with the papers for us on France 24. Gonna